Thank you very much. This is kind of terrifying when I was thinking about this talk, because I was thinking, okay, so there's a talk behind me, and it turns out to be the lady from DARPA, and the audience is a bunch of rocket scientists, so good luck. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you today about collaborative innovation. A few years ago, I met a Buddhist monk at a conference about sustainability, surprise, surprise. And what he was talking about was saying, like, basically sustainability is a bit of maybe perhaps the wrong language. In his view, it's more about adaptation and evolution. You can't keep the same stuff going on for years and years and years and years. You have to evolve it, you have to adapt it. And in that step of evolution is collaborative innovation, which is what I believe in as the way forward for both business and technologists. So the company I work for is a very large company. It's an advertising company. In fact, it's the largest in the UK. It's called AMV, and I run this little division of it called Forge. And what we try and do at Forge is basically do something really difficult, which is use new technology, make new technology, and turn it into new business that makes money. This is important because you can't continue sustaining old business in the old way. You have to keep going on. So to give you an example, this is a little fun example. One of our clients is a chewing gum brand, and their idea is all about stimulating the senses. So we thought it would be really interesting to try and find a solution to kind of engage with people around stimulating your senses. So we created, in collaboration with another company that specializes in sound, they made a game that has a video game that has no video. So essentially, you're stuck in a spaceship and you navigate through that spaceship simply by sound, chased by zombies. This turned out to be super successful that we actually relaunched it as a separate standalone game that makes its own money, which is quite interesting because we can all share in the success. This couldn't have happened without collaborative innovation. So the world, as I see it, is becoming a little bit less like a sandwich and a little bit more like a spaghetti, plate of spaghetti. If you think about Apple and the phone world, in the past you had something that looks a little bit like, you know, the phone on the left, very simple, very discrete, very organized unit. One company does that. If you look at a company like Apple, it has music, it has hardware, it has software. It's becoming almost a company with many doors. The App Store is nothing with app developers. Without the developers, that thing wouldn't have value in it. So collaboratively, you create value. A friend of mine launched this startup only a week ago, and basically it's a presentation tool for estate agents. And what's interesting about it, that he's building all his data. He takes the data from another company, takes that data from their API, and creates a new product out of it. Both companies win. Both companies make money out of it. So the point I want to make about this is that there is a new type of capitalism, capitalism that you cannot spell without API. You actually need to integrate different things. Technology forces us to integrate different things together. And the future is truly about collaboration, not competition. So I was thinking about what stops us from collaboration, what are the things that come in the way. The first one is identity. People get a little bit stuck into their job titles, and they kind of go, okay, my job title is this, I'm not going to do anything else. But speaking to Per earlier, he's somebody who does a million other things, not just one thing. And I think that's really important because you have to be flexible, you have to be adaptive. Trust is an important one. I think if you've ever been to a business school or anything to do with the business world, you've been taught to compete, not collaborate. And that doesn't really work with trust because quite often you actually have to learn how to collaborate because that builds trust. Fear, I'm not going to mention it because I think you've just seen an entire talk about it. But in our business, when you're creating a new product or a service, it's likely that it will fail, and you have to be prepared for that, and that's part of the process. So what do you do about all this? Well, believe it or not, you hack and you hustle, even in the UK's largest ad agency. So I'm going to show you a little film that explains a little bit of the way that we work.
I guess we're going to have to practice a lot tonight, so it's going to be fun. Definitely looking forward to it. I haven't tried the device just yet, so I'm very, very excited to see how it's going to interact and behave with us.
1 hour left until the presentation and trying to rehearse and get everything in order.
I think the worst thing is it's just the time, the stress, the fact that I wish I had just one more week on this.
The worst thing was when we discovered bugs last night at like 2:30 in the morning.
I get actually extremely nervous, but it doesn't show that much.
The worst probably... Well, it's gonna sound cheesy, but the worst is probably that we can't continue on doing things like this again.
We've been building an app for AMV clients to help them with reporting and give them like live snapshot of campaigns and social media conversations all in one place in their iPad.
That we might be the nerdy gang.
That was really difficult. I mean, we came up with an idea that we were very happy about. And we literally got grilled by the senior people at the agency. I mean, we got blasted public execution style. And then we came up with this one, which in a way is much more fun.
Optimism. How to fight
Today we've basically finished the script and storyboard for the movie that describes the concept, and we're working on the business model.
Aerospace engineering in Bucharest.
Anti-spam development.
A PhD in strategic communication science.
Books and digital growth for ebooks.
Media buying and campaign management.
As a digital creative in Berg School of Communication in Stockholm.
I have a background in tech, design.
I'm from Buenos Aires. I study in Stockholm, doing interactive communications.
Well, I'm a pixel perfectionist, so...
I started coding when I was 12 and then I didn't stop. That's my background.
Okay.
Yeah, amazing programmer, by the way. Thank you.
We can just say, look, it's detecting everything around it, right?
This is a demo from left and right, and this is the actual thing that is triggered.
Exactly.
Okay.
You don't have to...
That's easy.
Have fun for 1 week and just do crazy things. If you're gonna ask me that, I'm gonna say yes every time. So
The best thing, everything.
So the great thing about that is that when they first started working, they didn't have a clue what they were doing at the beginning of the week. And by the end of the week, we actually had 6 things that we could work with, things, products, and services. Our aim was to achieve 3. So I have 7 principles that I've learned and kind of discovered, if you like, throughout the years about how you do this type of work and how you innovate, particularly in a world of collaboration. The first one is mindless optimism. You basically need to be insanely optimistic. You have to totally believe you can do it. There is no way you're going to invent without that. I think any room for doubt before you even begin is actually not very helpful at all. And people who have that doubt will often bring you down. And one of my favorite examples of something that kind of embodies this spirit is this advert from Ernest Shackleton, who was the polar explorer. He said, "Men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. Apply here." And of course, you have to be slightly mad to apply to that sort of thing. But essentially, this is the spirit that you kind of need in order to innovate. I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to show you an example from some of the students that I work with sometimes. They're my students in Berg School of Communication and did this amazing project where they wanted to see how far they can go with ideas. Literally, how far can they go? And they said, what if we created thousands of ideas, not just one idea? So they spoke to 10 clients and they promised them they're going to give them 2,500 ideas per client. And in 25 days, they managed to generate 25,000 ideas written very simply in Post-it notes, so much so that they actually created an exhibition out of it. And the point about that, because they're young, because they're ambitious, and because they're trying to extend their ability, they discovered everything that they needed to know. They wanted to know everything they could about the nature of ideas, bad ideas, good ideas, big ideas, small ideas. And they did this project to stretch themselves. Needless to say, 2 of the ideas are already being made by those clients, and the other ones are being discussed for pre-production. So it's an amazing project, and it only comes from that kind of sense of optimism that you can actually come up with lots of ideas and actually work with them. The second principle is the circle of trust. I found this really interesting. I don't know whether you've seen the film with Robert De Niro, and he talks about the circle of trust. It's a funny film, but it's actually quite important. If you are going to work in an environment where failure is part of the process, where you don't really know where you're going, you really need to trust the people you're working with. And I think this is true now as it ever was for everybody. And how do you do that? So how do you build trust? Well, just to give you some examples of the people in this, you've seen the film, but some of these people are like super senior. They're people who run big, massive pieces of business. And there's a 19-year-old game developer in there and a 21-year-old creative, as well as kind of a world-famous creative director. There's all sorts of people coming in together. But the reason they're in the room is because they're best in class at what they do. They're best in class. It's the best people I could find to put in that room to get them together. And I think this generates trust and respect. They all know each other. They all know that they're there for a reason. Everybody deserves to be there. Social capital is quite important. This is a party in my flat in London before we began the Hack Week. I think the point about identity I made earlier, when people get too stuck in their kind of job titles, they forget they actually need to connect with a human being, somebody who has talent, somebody who has skill, somebody who has ability to produce and make stuff. So the trick with this was really about actually getting them to know each other, getting them to know the person rather than the job title or the profession or the skill. And I think it worked pretty well. By the end of the night, they were doing stuff like this. It's not your average corporate away day. The third principle is you have to create an environment for freedom where people have the freedom to fail, but plenty of room to succeed. In the previous talk, the lady talked about failure as part of the process and don't be scared of failure. I think that's a given. As an innovator or somebody who's actually making something new, you don't even think about that. But I think what you really need to do is that when you're coming together with other people who are also innovators, everybody needs to feel that they can share in the ambition and they can share in the reward. So this is actually quite important in business. Contracts, who owns what, who owns the idea, who gets to share in the success. And one of the earliest examples of this, I'll tell you a brief story from my past. I was in a startup. It was failing miserably. We were going nowhere, and we decided to dissolve it. And this guy who specializes in buying unsuccessful businesses, he comes, he breaks them apart, and then he sells the pieces, basically. He was Italian. He was very calm, but he was very ruthless. And he was going around kind of selling this and selling that and taking this. I said, but that's ours, and that's ours. He said, show me the contract. And I said, well, here's the contract. I said, it's not in the contract. You don't get it. And he very calmly and ruthlessly said these words to me that I will never forget. In Latin, verba volant, scripta manant, which basically means words fly, but what's written stays. And since then, I hated contracts. I hated contracts that kind of slice and divide and actually designed to put people away from each other. Today, when I write the contracts for my teams and the people I bring in internally, it's all about making sure that they have a fair share of success so that they don't hold back, so that they're not scared of actually contributing. So if you're creating an environment where people need to innovate, you need to make sure that people are doing the best they can possibly do, and they will only do that if they feel that they're protected and their rights are protected. The fourth principle is something comes from entrepreneurial cultures. So once you got your attitude right, you got kind of your sense of optimism, you got the contracts, you've done your casting, you got the right people, they all like each other before they even begin, you burn your ships. And burn your ships comes from entrepreneurial cultures. The idea here is that it comes from a story about an army that landed on a beach and they were outnumbered by the enemy, and then the leader of the army said, I'm going to burn the ships. He instructed his sailors to burn the ships, and they said, why? We can't go back. He said, actually the only way forward. We made the decision to actually attack and go ahead. We're going to have to progress. So progress is part of the process. You can't negotiate it. So the structure for doing any of these hack weeks or hack weekends is essentially the red stuff is the bookends. These are very clear guidelines. This is what we're going to do. There is no room for maneuver. First day is about ideas. We have to crack the idea the first day. There is no option. And this forces the mind to focus because people know that at the end of the day, the idea that they made is what they're going to use and what they're going to make the following day. And it follows on like that. So it's essential to have very clear guidelines, but actually within those guidelines, have an expectation and a commitment to deliver. One of my favorite examples comes from one of the Swedish development companies I work with. They have this lovely little hangman game that they play. They put this on their wall. And because developers are trying to focus and their work is kind of a focus type of work, they don't need distractions. So they play this game where every time somebody distracts a developer, they put a stick on that hangman. By the end of the week, if you're the last person to have distracted a developer from their work, you end up buying everybody lunch. Very motivating. It kind of forces that environment of, we are going to focus, we're going to commit, we're going to make this happen. The fifth principle is small prototypes for big ideas, and I think this is quite an important one. In the previous talk, the lady talked about prototypes and failure, and I'm just going to show you something that is very, very much live right now, and we're talking about it to various people. Essentially, the problem is big trucks, and this is a problem particularly for big cities, specifically London. Big trucks often have a big blind spot. They don't see cyclists coming from behind, from the left or from the right. And because London is very noisy, it's a big city, the drivers don't see the cyclists and they don't hear them. And quite often, we have lots of accidents. So the idea here was, could we put sensors? This is the first prototype that we made sitting on my desk. Could we put sensors on both the bicycle and the trucks so that we give a signal to the driver and say, hello, there is somebody behind you, please, don't kill them. And what's interesting about that prototype, it took, from the moment I heard about the problem, I pretty much came up with the idea immediately, but it took us 8 hours to make the very first prototype just to see whether it would work and what are the kind of limitations. What was really interesting that out of the 8 hours, the guys were spending 4 hours at Hamleys, the toy shop in London, trying to pick the right car in order to make the prototype. The other 4 hours was a little bit of coding, a little bit of soldering iron. But I think the principle is, we made it so badly, but we could see it. We could see the potential of it. And I think this kind of led us into, okay, so we started programming and started making a much, much more sophisticated system. So the latest version of this prototype is, this is the little dashboard that would sit at the driver's seat. And they will see a yellow light and a red light. The yellow light is passive. It basically says, hello, there is a cyclist behind you. And the red light is active. That's what the cyclist would press. And it will tell you, I am behind you. So this is an active signal. And this is the bell. So I think it's really important to kind of prototype very quickly and kind of keep developing and moving on. The second thing is, the sixth point is the art of the possible. No matter what you make, there will be problems, there will be barriers. And the most interesting example I can think of is the vacuum cleaner that Sir James Dyson in the UK did. The first one he made, from the moment he got the idea to the first prototype, it took him 1.5 hours to make. Guess how many years it took him to take it to market in the UK? 10 years. He actually had to build it, make it, sell it in Japan, prove the model, then come back to the UK, and then it took hold. So I think no matter what you do, there will be barriers, and you'll have to pivot and change and adapt and evolve with the market, not just kind of get stuck on a simple principle. And I'm going to finish with this example in a minute. The last point for me is about Massline leadership. What I love about the new world we live in and this stage of evolution in innovation and collaboration is that it's no longer You no longer have to wait, if you're 26-year-olds, you don't have to wait 40 years in order to run a multi-billion company. That's happening now on a daily basis in the tech industry. But what's also really nice is that we can all be part of innovation in various shapes and forms, even in small cases and big cases. My favorite example of the moment is from Kickstarter. It's a people-funded satellite that takes pictures. So you can take pictures of yourself, you send a little picture, and the satellite will take a picture of you with Earth as the background. All you have to do is put a few dollars on Kickstarter, and that will make that project happen. And I think this is really interesting, because the idea of the sandwich and the spaghetti that I talked about earlier, no longer companies and organizations are no longer just a discrete unit. They're actually much more evolved and much more open, and innovation is open to everybody. So that's really, really good news, and it's up to all of us to make that happen. So with this, I'm going to finish and hope you try and practice some of these things and share with the rest of the world what you can do. Thank you.